You felt it before the phone rang. Not a thought, not a fear. Something quieter than that. A shift in the room, a weight settling behind your ribs, a sudden urge to check on someone you hadn't spoken to in weeks. And then hours later, or maybe the next morning, the news came. And a small, uneasy voice inside you said, I knew. You didn't tell anyone. Because how do you explain it without sounding strange? How do you say, the air felt different that afternoon without watching someone's face politely rearrange itself, so you kept it inside? Another moment filed away in the quiet archive most INFJs carry, the one full of small confirmations no one else witnessed. There's a name for what you experience, or at least a way to understand it that doesn't require magic or dismissal. Some INFJs call it phantom intuition, a sense of arrival before the event, a knowing that shows up in the body before it can be traced by the mind. And if you felt it more than once, if you felt it enough times to stop being surprised by it, this is worth sitting with, because it isn't a gift, it isn't a curse, it's a pattern, and patterns can be understood. Carl Jung, who first described introverted intuition, the dominant function of the INFJ, believed it operated beneath conscious awareness. He described it as a perception that arrives whole without the steps of logic that produce it. You don't build the conclusion piece by piece. It appears. And only afterward, sometimes much later, do you trace back the small signals that led you there. A change in someone's voice weeks ago, a sentence they said that didn't quite match their face, a pause that lasted a beat too long, a photo they posted where their smile didn't reach their eyes. You noticed all of it. You didn't file it consciously, but something in you did. And when the pattern completes, when the missing piece arrives, your body registers it before your mind does. That's the shift you feel. That's the weight behind your ribs. That's the phantom. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio spent decades studying how the body carries emotional information. He called them somatic markers, physical sensations that store the emotional weight of past experiences and quietly guide us long before conscious reasoning catches up. A tightness in the chest, a dropping feeling in the stomach, a restlessness you can't explain. Damasio found that these signals aren't noise. They're a form of intelligence. The body remembers what the mind has stopped tracking. For an INFJ, the system runs deeper than most because you were already tracking more faces, more tones, more undercurrents, more subtle shifts in the people around you than the average person even notices. Your nervous system holds an enormous amount of quiet data. And when enough of that data lines up in a particular way, your body reacts before you can articulate why. That is the phantom intuition, not prophecy, not a sixth sense in the mystical sense, something more grounded and in some ways more remarkable. It's your introverted intuition finishing a pattern your conscious mind never fully saw. And this is where I want you to slow down. Because if you've been carrying these experiences quietly, wondering if something is wrong with you, wondering if you're too sensitive, or too dramatic, or too imaginative, this is where the reframe matters. You are not imagining things. You are perceiving things. There is a difference. Imagination invents what isn't there. Perception picks up what is, and INFJs, more than most types, live in the space between those two, which is why you sometimes doubt yourself even when you're right, because the information arrives without evidence, without a receipt, without something you can hand to someone else and say, see, this is why I feel this way. You just feel it. And feeling, in a world that worships proof, can feel like a kind of loneliness. So you learn to hold it quietly. You learn not to say the thing you sensed. You learn to wait for the outside world to catch up before you allow yourself to trust what your inside world already knew. But here's what I want you to hear. Every time your phantom intuition has been right, every time the call came, every time the news landed, every time the person you were thinking about reached out with something heavy, your system logged it. Silently, your body remembers being right, even when your mind talked you out of it in the moment. That's why the feeling has weight now, because it has history, because part of you has stopped needing external confirmation to know what it knows. Stephen Porges, the researcher behind polyvagal theory, describes something called neuroception, the nervous system's ability to detect safety or danger below the level of conscious awareness. It scans faces, tones, environments, and shifts in energy, and it responds before you know it's responding. Everyone has this system, but in highly sensitive nervous systems, and INFJs often have them, neuroception runs finer, picks up more, reacts sooner. So when you sensed something was wrong the day before the news came, you weren't guessing. You were reading a room, a voice memo, a text message, a memory, all at once, below language, below thought, below anything you could have justified out loud. And this is the part that most INFJs never let themselves fully accept, that the sensitivity you've apologized for your whole life is also the reason you know things other people miss, that the exhaustion you feel after certain conversations is the cost of an instrument tuned finely enough to hear what isn't being said, that the phantom intuitions aren't a strange add-on to your personality. They're a direct consequence of how much you take in. You cannot have this kind of perception without the sensitivity that produces it. They arrive together. They are the same thing, seen from two different angles. So what do you do with this? How do you live with a system that knows before it can explain? You stop arguing with it. That's the beginning. You don't have to act on every sensation. You don't have to call every person you suddenly think of. You don't have to interpret every feeling as prophecy. But you also don't have to dismiss what your body tells you just because it arrived without paperwork. You can simply notice. Something in me is shifting right now. I don't know why. I'm going to make a small note of it, and I'm going to let it be. That's enough. That's a way of honoring your own perception without turning it into something anxious or performative. And when the news does come, and you feel that quiet click of there it is, you don't need to make it mean anything mystical. You can simply say, my system was tracking something. It usually does. That's who I am. Because that's who you are. Someone who feels the weather before the storm. Someone who reads the room before anyone speaks. Someone whose body carries the quiet knowledge of years of paying attention. It is not a burden to be understood, but it is a specific way of being in the world, and it doesn't need fixing. It never did. If this gave you language for something you've carried quietly, you can stay with me here. There is no rush, only slow, reflective videos for deep minds who move at an inner pace, a quiet place for deep minds